Thank you for coming. Hopefully, this is a standard group, so hopefully you can ask a lot of questions. We're going to dive into some of the interesting data that you guys have been entering. And this is not a high-level sort of 50,000 feet view. This is what can you do, practical ways to figure out how to achieve some of the goals that you need to improve your graduation rates and reduce recidivism, how to identify people who may abscond, people who may not graduate, and things like that. So we'll cover that in good detail. I'll mind this. So the whole idea of this presentation is what can data do for your course, okay? And what do we want you to take from this presentation? What we want you to take from this presentation is what is a model that helps you understand your data, right? How do you figure out what you need to see in the data, And this is the pretty initial part of it. The data can tell you lots of things. You don't need to get into the nitty-gritties and everything, because that could take days and months of trying to implement something. Because I could speak about it and then you'll forget about it and then that'll be the end of it, right? That's not the point. The point is to convey some unique aspects that you can take back, review the same data that I'm going to show you for your courts, and then try and see if you can implement some of those data points into your day-to-day court hearings and things like that. Okay, so the idea being that we will give you a framework on how to use it. We will tell you what we have learned from the data on how to improve graduation rates. So if your graduation rate is 60, 65, 55, whatever that might be, how do you plan to improve that by 5%, 10%? What do you need to do that, right? So that's one of the things. And then how do you identify a potential unsuccessful participant? That they are going to be unsuccessful in the future. What is the characteristics of a potentially unsuccessful participant? Which is one of the more important things that we need to know. Can we realize from the data that, oh boy, this person isn't doing so well and they're treading down the path that they're going to become unsuccessful in the future, right? So we'll dive into these three aspects. So Mona's going to take over this part, which is talking about the model and what it means. Go ahead.
All right, so who is the audience for your data? Who needs to know this stuff? Well, we got quite a bit of an audience. First of all, your own team. And they're a really important audience, I think, for this data. The judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, your treatment providers, your drug testing folks, your data matters to them. And they should be the ones who first see your data and have the opportunity to be part of that review process. I can't think of anything that's going to do more to help build your team and keep your team motivated than the opportunity to be part of the review of the data. Then we have your local and your state, national stakeholders. They need to know about your data and what it means. That's your legislators, which we hope Jeff takes care of. But you've got your county folks, your commissioners, your county prosecutor, public defenders, and of course then at the national level. We got a lot of stakeholders that ought to be exposed to your data. Our community constituents, you heard a lot about that from Carolyn Harding, and boy are they important. We've got to sell our drug court to the community if we hope to ever get the kind of buy-in that we really need, and to get some local funding sources going for some of the extras that we desperately need. Then our taxpayers. And one of the things that comes out of the data process can be things like outcome evaluation, shouting our results so that we can get that kind of buy-in from the community, and we can do cost effectiveness evaluation. We are in fact saving our community a lot of dollars. And just to kind of tweak your interest in that, one county in Yellowstone County, one little drug court saved over $1 million in incarceration costs. Now that's worth shouting about. But do that if you're not collecting your data and evaluating and doing the kind of processing that we're going to talk about today.
And to add to Mona's point, one of the things that happens is that you put all this data in, then it goes up to Jeff and the state and all of those things. And by the time you see that data, it's already been, a year or so by the time you see this. So how do we shorten that time frame where you enter the data and you see the data? And Jeff and the Kevin one in the state does their data thing, what they need to do. That should not impact your turnaround. I think what Mona's trying to also say is that should be a quicker turnaround than a much lengthier turnaround of seeing your data.
Yeah, and it's something that you at the local level, what I'm trying to say to you today is, if you will get involved with the model we're talking about in the process, this is your data, and you ought to get that return on the investment right away. You don't need to wait for somebody else to produce the data for you. What this is saying is drug courts have faced considerable criticism due to their lack of evaluation and data collection. If there is a significant threat to the future of our drug courts, it will be due to this deficiency. It is simply not enough to have national data. We must have solid evaluation of drug courts at the operational level. That's you guys. That's us at the community level. And, we really can't say that our drug court, your drug court, my drug court, is successful if we're not really measuring our success and have hard data to prove it. We really can't. So, you've heard this and you've read it and you've heard Marlo and everybody else say it. It is a best practice to review your data regularly, right? Well, what does that mean? And I used to wonder, and I keep waiting for them to say, because nobody really tells you, how do you do that? What does it mean? That's what I hope you take away today. Here is what it means. It means that you're going to implant, if you will, a continuous quality improvement process. That's what you're going to use to review your data. And what is a continuous quality improvement model? Well, it's this model. It's really pretty simple. First, you identify and collect the data. Now, DIMS has really done that for you. You just have to know which data elements you're supposed to use, so that those are the ones that you pull out next to DIMS to review. So you identify and collect that data. It's already collected for you. Then you're going to evaluate that data. We're going to do that today together. And then we're going to say, gee whiz, what does that mean? And then we're going to take any corrective actions that we need to take to improve and our results. It's a simple process. And it's a cyclical process that we do all the time. Now, our drug courts, many of them are not really huge. If you have a fairly large drug court, you want to do this quarterly. You want to do a quarterly review. If you're not really large, you might want to do it semi-annually. But you want to do it regularly. You don't want things to get away from you. So that's the model. It's called continuous quality improvement. Voila. Data is the cornerstone of the continuous quality improvement model. It is, the whole idea is that data and this process is what separates what you think is happening from what's really happening. Okay, without the data, you're not going to be able to see the reality. It establishes a benchmark from which your progress is going to be measured. And it reduces ineffective solutions that really aren't going to work. Okay? It's also going to indicate whether or not the changes you make are really working. Now, as I say this, today we're rolling out a drum fest. I mean, I wish we had some drums, honestly. we've got some pretty exciting information. For the very first time, you notice that term up here, benchmark? We're going to show you some data, and you're going to be the first ones to see this data. When we talk about reviewing your data against inequality or continuous quality improvement process, we have never had comparative data, right? We do today. And I really hate to do this because his wife, his lovely wife, is sitting right here amidst us, and he's going to get a really big head. But Vivek and his company has done a really remarkable thing. He doesn't know I was going to say this. But they have now taken all of the Montana drug courts data, and they have aggregated the findings and broken them down by type of drug court, okay? And so we have comparative data across Montana for each kind of drug court against all these data points that we need. Now, that's good enough, but not to be outdone, he's taken it across the, 35 states that you're in? So we have the national data by type of drug court against all of the data points he's going to introduce to you. And so we can compare our data for each of the data elements we're going to show you against how does my drug court look for a given data element in Montana if I'm an adult treatment court. In Montana, how do I compare, and how do I compare against whatever state I want to look at, or group of states. And we're going to show you, we picked 3 rural states to look at. This is really good stuff. And this is being shown for the first time today. Even Jeff doesn't know this.
So
I'm pretty
are those
excited.
results available to us?
Yeah, we will share this with you, and those results will be available. And one of the things I'm working with Kevin is to broadcast Montana, because Kevin has access to the Montana data on a click of a button. Just like you do for your court, Kevin and team has for their entire state. And we're trying to push this agenda out that you can then not only, so there's 2 parts to this, right? One is how do you use your own data to improve your courts, but then how do you measure against other courts of the same kind? And the reason that's important is because you will see, if you're running a DUI court, you cannot compare it to an adult court. Those numbers will not match. It just look like one court is doing a really great job and the other one isn't. So you can't compare those 2, right? But there are certain elements which are common between those data points. And then I think this one is...
This is still me? Oh yeah, okay. Well, I had to let you know, because I don't think he'd brag about it, but I mean, this is really important stuff. I took Carolyn Harden aside this morning to tell her, and I said to her, Carolyn, has anybody else done this? And she said no. So this is pretty blockbuster stuff for those of us that love numbers.
So, we're going to get into some of the data points. We're going to talk about what is it that you should look at. And this is not specific to an adult court or a family court. I'm sure that, or a DUI court, I'm sure there will be additional data points added on top of it. But these are just the basic core on which all adult courts, or all drug courts can be run on.
All right, so we'll go back because I didn't cover this slide. All right, so the point is, what will your data tell you? Now you guys, you spend enormous amounts of time putting all this damn data into DIMS, and I know it's a burden. So what are you going to get out of it? What's in it for you? That's the question. Well, first of all, it's going to tell you how effective are your drug court services in the aggregate. Are our services effective? That's the benefit to this continuous quality improvement process. It's also going to tell you what your participants really look like. And you're going to say, well, don't we know that? No, you really don't. You don't know it until you create a thorough demographic profile. And it is always a surprise. It's always a surprise to your team to see, oh, it's always an oh. What can you do to improve your graduation rates? It will tell you that. And we've got another piece of blockbuster information around that today. And so it will also tell you what the very common characteristics are going to be are of a successful graduate versus an unsuccessful. It will let you predict who the unsuccessful people are going to be. And this will be over time increments. It may change. So this is why you got to do this kind of stuff regularly. What is true this year won't be true next year. Even semi-annually, it may change. And the reason I get excited about this over time is I found by doing this, over the many years that I did this, at Rimrock, for example, when I was there, we predicted the meth crisis way back when, if any of you are old enough to remember. We could see it coming through our QI process because we always were collecting drug of choice information through our QI process, and you could see the pattern coming. You know, as Carolyn said, this stuff comes kind of in waves. It never really goes away, but it does come in waves. And our QI process picked that up. We could see it happening and coming. And there were lots of things like that in the field that was through our routine review in QI that we could see a lot of different patterns happening and coming. And therefore, you're in a position to respond. You know, you're not caught short on things. You can see them coming and you can be ready and you can respond proactively to the changing kinds of utilization patterns that are happening. So now you take it.
I've got a question
Yes.
too, I think, or maybe just an observation and a question. I can see some positives and negatives in that, knowing who your unsuccessful participants could be, because it lends itself to the danger of cherry picking your participants to have success rates. But
Right.
you know, if
Good.
you use the criteria that you're going to share with us as ways to target how we can turn that around,
Absolutely. That's the
then
idea.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, the
That's the
idea
idea.
is that it's almost impossible to tell if someone is going to be unsuccessful on day one. You don't know that. No one knows that, and for me to say that would be foolish. What we're talking about is phase 2, phase 3. They've already been in your court for some time. How do you know, because you want to look at the data that is being produced by them as they are going through your program to then figure out, oh, this is not headed in the right direction, and what are the fundamental data points that you can look at. So I'm going to share some of these stats with you. Now, we're going to compare some of the data points today with your court, which I don't know what that is, with Montana and with some nationwide rural courts. And you can see that Montana already is doing pretty well compared to some of the rural courts we've picked in here.
You might tell them which nationwide.
Yeah, so we've picked spiritus patter of courts in North Carolina, South Dakota, New Mexico, and Washington states. Okay, so everyone is comparable. None of them are high, very high populated areas. So they all reflect towns and cities that are, what reflect what Montana is. Okay. Now, what does this tell you? 66% of the males graduate successfully in Montana. 68% of the females do. That is really good because nationwide, that thing is turned around, right? You can move here if you want. So that's really good. And why do you want to do that? Is because you want to track your graduation rate. Just not your graduation rate, but also your graduation rate by males and females. Everything I'm about to show you today is available for your core at a click of a button. You don't have to go in and enter any extra data. As long as you've been using them, the data is already there and it's giving you this. I've just gone in and picked this data out. I haven't done any calculations on this data. As you can see, graduation rates good 8% above the national average. So that's great. If you look at the
Pat
numbers,
yourselves on the back, isn't that great?
yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
know how your court looks. We don't know your court numbers, but Montana looks pretty darn good.
so the reason we put screened and rejected, of course, these numbers are not apples to oranges because we're covering more states. One of the interesting things that come up is that Montana only rejects 8% of the people that are referred to them, whereas nationwide that's 25%. Why that is the case, I don't know. This is just, we're not trying to figure out inferences from that, we're just saying this is what the stats are saying, and these are the data points that we have to look at, Why are we looking at the rejected ones? Because we have to keep track of why we are rejecting them. Is it because we don't have the resources to take care of them? And if we don't, then how does that look in the funding that you have to apply for the following year, right? Is that, well, we don't have the, Medicaid resources, we don't have money resources, we don't have, our treatment providers cannot provide the service that is required by the, the risk and need assessment or whatever comes out of that. We don't have that data. We don't have the resources for that.
Now, hold on just a second, I have to comment as an evaluator of drug courts. One of the things that I see, like when you look at you compare your own court, I have some courts where they are rejecting over half of the people that are referred to them. So that's why you want to look at your court also against that kind of thing. So one of the things that I'll be saying to them is, why is your rejection rate so high? So even though Montana compared nationally, you still want to look at your own and say, whoa, you're rejecting over 50% of the people being referred. And so you want to look at, is it a function that you're getting inappropriate referrals and you need to educate your referral sources better so you get, what's that about? This is the kind of review process, and that continuous process that you're looking at is like, what's that about? Even though we look rosy, you may still have issues in your own court that you've got to look at.
So then we're going to look at some more. So these data points that we're talking about are the data points that you should be concerned about as you go through your own review process that Mohan is talking about, the continuous evaluation. The next one is drug of choice in Montana is meth and alcohol as the top, almost the same. We see that in the other nationwide courts as well. The other thing that we are looking at is GED. And the reason we look at GEDs because what the data is telling us is folks with GED are twice as likely to graduate than folks without GED. That's a given. We see that across the board, right? And these are some of the recommendations we're going to make is if the person doesn't have a GED, move towards that, right? They are just from a data standpoint more likely to do that.
Does that also include people that have a high school diploma? I mean, because we have people in our drug courts that did graduate from high school.
The GED includes high school diplomas. Yeah, it's that whole thing. High school diplomas, GEDs is the same aspect that we mentioned.
Sort of the least education they've got to have is a GED.
Yeah.
Anything less than that, they're going to do poor.
Right.
They're in
Now,
that cohort.
one interesting thing that we do see is while for Montana, 59% of the graduates have a GED, the change from no GED to GED is only 5%. What that says is, so we collect data at 2 points, at induction and at discharge. And we calculate the difference in the improvement. And in your analytics, you can also see how many people improve their education and what percentage. Nationwide, 10% of the folks who have a lower than GED education come up to the GED level. That in Montana is 5%. What that means is that you could have more people who did not have a GED get a GED, because that will increase their chances of graduation twice. If you don't correlate the data but look at it independently, that's what you're looking at, right? Housing. 94% of the folks that left the drug course in Montana successfully graduated, had housing. And housing is one of the key components of graduating successfully. We look at stabilization, and I know Marlo talks a lot about that, stabilization. Stabilization is number one, and housing is number two. They have to be stable. Nothing matters more than that. Are they showing up? And are they stable in their treatment? That is the only goal that you have to achieve. After that, you move on to these kind of goals. And tracking this is very important. Incentive to sanction ratios. This used to not be 10:1. It used to be much lower. It has come up in the last year and a half or two. It's not that people weren't incentivizing enough. It was that what we saw coordinators do is not realize what an incentive is. And oftentimes you will, not you, but court staff and teams will equate incentives to a tangible exchange, a gift card, a chocolate, a gas card. And they leave out applauses and congratulations as incentives. And the survey that we did for graduates, do you know the number one thing that they said encouraged them to continue the program as an incentive was? That the judge and the staff cared about them, and they said, good job. And the reason they did that is because they've not had the parental figurehead in their lives who's ever told them that they are doing a good job. So while a gas card and those kind of things are important, what we see is that this is equally, if not more important. It doesn't cost you anything. And yet, it helps in them staying and not, relapsing in the middle of the program.
It was kind of a positive feedback cycle, because the more you track it, the more you think about it and how you realize it's important. And then you're like, we have to remember to give them their
Exactly.
and talk about it.
And some of the folks, who were there yesterday with the apps that we are rolling out here, right? Giving an affirmation has never been easier.
Right.
You could be sitting in bed watching TV, and you could open up your phone and in 2 seconds send an affirmation to 10 people. And that's what you really need to do. Send positive affirmation. Folks that sent positive affirmation during the pandemic did not lose participants. They kept in touch, right? So again, incentive to sanction ratios is important. It tells you, because the incentive to sanction ratio for successful graduates is 10:1. Any guesses on what it is for unsuccessful graduates? Almost 1.5:1. It's a clear indicator that if most of the time you're sanctioning that person, something is wrong, right? And looking at the sanction to incentive ratio in DIMS will tell you that this is not headed in the right direction. Employment. I'll give you some time to read that. 61% of the people who had full-time employment were successful. And 3% of the unemployed were successful. That just gives you the clear-cut picture on how important employment has been in the success of participants. And these are the data points you're actually going to measure for each person. Do they have housing? Are they stable? What is the incentive to sanction ratio? What does their employment look like? It's not necessarily a phase one thing, but the sooner you get to it, the better chance. It's very simple, It's like when I was doing a course in sociology, we were told that, house break-ins and robberies decrease in the winter is because the folks doing it don't want to go out in the cold.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is here. If you have to get up in the morning, brush, shower, and show up, and then get home at 6 p.m. and worry about dinner, you don't have time to do this. It's just what it is, right? And how do you get them sooner? And the data is very, very clear. Look at the part-time success versus full-time. 19% of the part-time was successful. Look at the full-time jump. And the same thing on the nationwide. You see, less than 4%, and it's almost the same. Less than 4%. But look at the unsuccessful. 44%, or if you add this up, 60% of the people who had no jobs or had a part-time job did not graduate successfully. Right? It's pretty clear on what needs to be done when it comes to employment.
It's same for reunification rates in child and family services, which you would think would be counterintuitive. Like the more time they're working, the less successful they could be. But as soon as they get employed, their success rates for reunification go to like 75%. It's really high.
Yeah, I think it's just like, they have less time to think about shenanigans, if I may.
Yeah.
So are you, and maybe you'll answer this later, are you taking these numbers though from the end of their time, or will we be able to manipulate this and say we want to compare people who are within, phase 2?
You
So
can.
are my phase 2 full-time people seeing the same kind of 61%?
So,
Is my question
This
making
is a
sense?
discharge.
This is a discharge.
Yeah.
So this, whatever data I'm showing you is second quarter of this year. Because we haven't yet completed Q3 just about yet, so this is from Q2. It's a very small data set. And the reason we picked Mona and I picked a quarter is because we thought if you're a court, you can do it that often. The continuous evaluation process that she's talking about, the CQI, that can be done on a quarter by quarter basis. This took me about 1 hour yesterday to pull all of this data and put it. It takes even less time to just read it. I had to, copy it and paste it on here and all those things.
I think what she's talking about, though, is really important for us to understand when it comes to writing the treatment plans, because we don't want to force people into full-time employment before they're cognitively ready for that.
Absolutely.
And so looking at the phases,
So
implementing.
I'll come to that. And,
Yeah, okay.
and this relates to what Marlo also said. Phase 1 is not about employment. We're not saying that. What we're saying is, as they move to phase 2 and phase 3, these things become more important because it's a given that they should be stable, otherwise they're not getting out of phase 1, right?
Right.
If they don't have housing, they're not getting out of phase 1, phase 2 kind of region, right? So this is more
Housing
of
has
phase
to
2,
happen
phase
in
3.
phase 1. Period.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is phase 2, phase 3 stuff that we are looking at here. Is the employment, is the education. Drug courts mandate that they should have a GED by the time they graduate. What I and Mona were talking about is it the other way around? They're graduating because they have a GED, or are they getting a GED and then they're graduating? You see, it's if you get that before, the chances are doubling. So why wouldn't you push that agenda with them? When we talk about what can I do with this participant, well, look at these 4 or 5 things and see how is this person GED. And when we talk about the characteristics of someone who is going to be unsuccessful, incentive to sanction ratios, education, do they not have a GED yet? Well, that's a problem. Are they not employed? No, that's a problem. They're all indicators, because when you look at these data points individually, they are very clear. It's much more difficult to correlate and say, you know what, because they didn't have an education and they didn't have a job, they were unsuccessful. Maybe, maybe not. But if they individually had a job and they had education, the chances of graduation from the data points to, yes, huge number, 61% versus 3% graduation, right? Any questions on this? No? Program durations. The longer you stay in the program, the better it is not true. The sweet spot that we are discovering from the data is around the 18 to 20 month mark, that zone of things. If they go beyond that, the graduation rates do drop. And this is primarily because they most likely have either absconded or done things, have gone into inpatient treatment for a couple of months because they have been so, they need that kind of treatment that they've not been able to come to drug court. And that is why it's increasing. Now, that might not be the only reason. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is what the data is showing, that, as you can see, it's almost 0% in less than 6 months. 15% between 7 and 12, and look at the jump to 42%, and then back down to 17% beyond the 18-month mark.
It's kind of bell shaped.
Right, and again, the same thing can be looked at from a nationwide level. It's not anything different. We're seeing the same thing here and there.
So, I mean, I guess we do, I'm assuming, we write all of our programs for people to be done in approximately 12 to 18 months. So it would make sense
Right.
for most people to be graduating during that time.
But you'd be
So-
surprised at how many drug courts are keeping people for 22 months.
So then, okay, so then the people, I guess, and then I want to clarify, so that amount of time, the 19 to 24 months, the people that had to stay that long, so only 17% of those people that had to stay that long then graduated.
No,
That's-
17% of them graduated successfully. We are not saying the 17% of the population stayed in the 19 to 24 month. We're saying 17% of the people staying beyond the 19th month graduated. Everybody else, 83% of the people staying beyond the 18th month did not graduate successfully.
But I think one of the reasons is maybe that they've already stabilized, and so now you're forcing on them
Yep.
things that they don't need it.
That's right.
And this is some of the stuff that the data doesn't say, but your local knowledge of your population, your local knowledge of how the area behaves, all of that is you. And the data will never be able to tell that. What we're trying to say is, look at this, add on to whatever you know, and most of you know this in the back of your mind that this is probably happening. Let the data cement some of those theories, and let the data refute some of the misconceptions that you may have about your court, right? It's not a right or wrong, it's just what the data says. Take that into account, see what you're thinking from your vast experience, combine the two things together, and then take decisions.
One example I can give you of a court that I was working with that had horrendous long stays. I mean, they had a 24-month stay. And because they had these huge requirements within their phases, they were really hooked on numbers of days and phases that things had to get done. And it was just simply too long. I mean, it was just simply too long. It took people too long to get things done in all of their phases. And quite frankly, people just flaked out. I mean, it was burdensome, it was boring, that kind of thing, and so they lost people.
They got treatment court fatigue.
Burned out, burned out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's kind of this law
Yeah,
of
same idea
diminishing,
you see here is the
Yeah.
balance that we're talking about,
I
right?
call it the law of diminishing returns.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's something you want to take a look at. If you're keeping people beyond about 19 months, you better take a look at that.
Is that one of those predictors of not being successful?
Because only
Okay.
a very few percentage of them, well, the data says that a very few percentage of people lasting beyond that time frame, the Goldilocks zone that we're talking about, after that, they're not doing so well.
Well, it makes perfect sense, because people that are in that long, it's because you've been sanctioning and sanctioning and sanctioning. Just,
Yeah.
it's like.
You're not
treatment court is
graduating,
working for jobs.
things like
Yeah.
that. The goals that you're setting
Yeah.
are not being met.
Yeah.
Or if you have a mandatory rule that the treatment court time is that long.
Right, I guess you're right, there could be people who are requiring 24 months, but I guess I'm looking at, as a predictor of our participants, if they are hanging out past 18 months, we need to take a
We
look at
haven't
it, like,
done the right things.
Yeah.
So
or
Hannah,
maybe they're just not a good fit, like maybe
Yeah,
they're just
right.
not going to get something.
so Hannah, when I was being evaluated for my court, I had a couple of participants that had been in phase 1 for like 90 days, about 90 days. They stagnated, and I couldn't get my team to move past that. You know, they're not, they had no positive UAs in 90 days. Why aren't we? Well, because they didn't check that box, because they weren't in here, so, and they didn't have any sanctions. So we, my team, stagnated that person's growth.
And to that point, the previous one, that the previous lecture talked about that, right? Is this idea that we have 5 phases and that there's so many days. These are all made up numbers. There is no science behind it. No one's ever done any research, and she's looking for funding to do exactly that, right? So I think we have to all, learning from what the experts are saying, you have to take it with a grain of salt and say, yes, this person has not met all the goals, but can you move them along
are they goals that are appropriate to that person? You know,
Right.
it's like individualized, the need for individualized treatment. There's a need for individualizing things within phases, for what are the skills they have to get? And beyond that, move them on, you know?
It's the ABCD F method with grades, right? The person you get an A because you checked every box. The person who got the C met enough that
Yes.
they would
Right, exactly. It's the same idea.
Please
So,
get degrees.
They do, right? How many people are like, hey, I need to know, did you get a 4.0 or did you get the 2.0? Right, there are very few
right.
jobs that they really care about that. They just want to know that you have the piece of
The
paper.
letters
hang on.
behind your name.
So coming to the drug of choice, this is a little bit of a revealing factor for me, and I was telling Mola that I didn't realize, look at this. Success, this is for folks that have the primary drug of choice as the following, their success and unsuccess rates. And marijuana has a lower success rate than meth for the state of Montana, and it's almost the same thing nationwide, so it's not an abnormality, right? You can look at that, 37%, 50% of the people on marijuana graduate unsuccessfully. And that's something to think about. Because if I used to compare marijuana and alcohol as the same thing, like yeah, it's there, they get over it, because I used to look at alcohol data, and I was like 78%, that sounds fantastic. But then what I start to realize is, folks that have a DUI issue most likely also hold jobs. A good percentage of them also just landed up in the DUI program because they're drinking and driving. They didn't necessarily go commit a heinous crime or went and, did something bad. They were just caught a few times doing that, but they managed to still hold a job and things like that, and maybe that's why the graduation rate of alcohol is better. Maybe it's better because it's pretty old, right? And a lot of research has been done on how to help Alcohol Anonymous and programs like that to help them succeed. Maybe marijuana is a pretty new thing, and we all are experiencing legalization, and what that means, God only knows, right?
Well, there's a perception that marijuana is not mood altering or mentally impairing.
That
It is.
data in the last quarter's data is showing that, which means the people who left your program in the state of Montana, 50% did not graduate, who started off saying that their primary drug of choice was marijuana. So what we're trying to say here is, if a person walks in with the following, they're already behind the 8 ball. It's already tough because they're not graduating, and again, I'm not trying to say that this relates to that. I don't know, I'm not qualified, and frankly, you have to be a soothsayer to figure that out, right? That this and this and this combination will lead to this. There are too many factors at play here, but just something to think about, and this data is with you. Your graduation rates are going to be with you.
Kind of scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because my sense about it is, I know that most of the drug courts I work with would pay very little attention to marijuana.
Well, I've just now gotten my very first referrals for a DUI, and they were related to THC. So previously, we just didn't have referrals for marijuana. But recently, with those new DUI for marijuana, it'll be interesting to see what it looks like.
Yeah, and it's good to have this data because now you know the graduation rates of people with marijuana as primary. So it's already like, it's worse than meth. So if you thought that it was going to be not that bad, like I thought that, they're wrong. So now that we've gone through some of the major data points that you should be tracking, Mona's going to talk a little bit about, what is the demographic profile of that person, which would tell you that, yeah, it's not looking too good and we need to work on that, right?
Well, yeah, so what is a demographic profile? Well, basically, the things that make up a demographic profile in terms of your data set, it's going to be the age, gender, education, and of course it's reported out in terms of buckets. In other words, age categories, which is what you want, education, employment, ethnicity. Remember we talked, you heard presentations on how important the ethnicity piece is, and drugs of choice. That's going to be your demographic profile.
And if you don't know already, we have data on age, you have data on age. The older they are, the better they do.
Yeah.
We see that across the board. Just if you didn't know, you should know that.
So you're going to monitor that demographic profile because you want to know, is it changing? Who are people? What do they look like? Am I standing right in front of you? I'm sorry.
Fine, Mona.
Is it changing? How is it looking? What are the trends? Is our age changing? You know, how is that looking? Are folks getting older? Are they getting younger? I've noticed that tends to change a lot and fairly rapidly.
Right, and adding back to the previous point about the age, if your age is decreasing,
Yeah.
and you know that younger people do worse, you now know that your graduation rate is going to go below,
Yeah.
just by you not doing anything wrong.
Going
Right.
to be
It's going to
affected.
happen.
Now, this doesn't relate to trying to pick people or have any impact on your referrals. I mean, let's face it, we're all ethical people. We're not going to do cherry picking. What we're trying to do here is to be on top of these changing patterns so we can make course adjustments. That's what we're really all about, to be aware. We've got younger people, so we're going to have to make some adjustments in the way we're managing our people.
Are you finding any trends that are working well with a younger population?
You mean strategies?
Yeah, just strategies to keep them
Well,
engaged. Because we
I
really struggle
think,
with
yeah,
that.
I think one of the things we've got to pay a lot more attention to is building in more pro-social activities. If we're going to be seeing more younger people, they've got to be kept busier with more pro-social activities, for sure. You can't, and especially if your drug profile says the drug of choice is a lot of meth. Okay, let's say we've got a younger age, we've got a lot of meth going, employment is not good. And let's face it, guys, our job is not to leave people, they can be employed, but if all they're doing is flipping burgers, one of our jobs is to lift these people out of poverty and give them the skill sets to get out of poverty. You've got to keep these young people busy. And they don't know how to be busy productively. So what are we going to do as a drug court? We're going to find alternatives and build those in. Those are some of the kinds of ancillary kinds of activities that we have to be involved with, whether we like it or not. So those are the kinds of things that we've got to pay attention to. I know one of my drug courts is just now developing a life skills curriculum because it's just desperately needed. I mean, again, Carolyn made a real key point. The younger they are, the more they're likely going to need habilitation.
And we'll also talk a little bit about younger and older population and what we have learned from the data illustrates. So, data points to keep an eye out on, right? Positive drug screens, are they increasing? And it's not really correlated because it is correlated in the sense that if they're having positive drug screens, which means that they're being sanctioned, which means the sanction incentive ratio is dropping. You see how everything is starting to make, to tie up into the same thing. So if you start to track one metric, it's probably related because of another metric. So knowing a sanction, again, same thing, right? Is it below the national standards? And why? Are we not incentivizing enough because we don't know that this is also an incentive? And oftentimes what we've also seen is that judges that don't have experience with drug court but other courts, that they come into this, there is a sense of they're not as empathetic towards the folks as they should be. And I think that's where some of the coordinators, experienced coordinators come in and sort of guide the judges. It's not always the judge really knows everything on what's going on. So some of that guidance has to be done. Jail sanctions. No jail sanctions in the first two phases. We see people with jail sanctions in the courts. The whole point that they are in drug court is to be out of jail, and then they do something, you put them back into jail. It's counterintuitive. It's not productive, right? It gives up, it sort of says, oh, well, you're so bad and pathetic that you came here and we're going to put you right back to jail again. Keep them out of jail. Average treatment court program, 16 to 18 months. And monitoring the number of days in court, because these two are related. As you mentioned, the person's not graduating because of a particular, it's not, it's not just black or white, right? Work with the teams and figure out how to, it's okay if they didn't push them out, maybe make that goal for them in phase 2. And stress upon that fact.
The great thing about, I think, DIMS is that you can easily see, readily see, where you can't, for instance, for those of you that are still using DCCM, you can see the number of days that someone's in a phase. And so you can see the outliers. And if somebody is going way past a number of days in phases, pay attention to that, like what's happening? This person's stalling out, what's going wrong? That's really something you want to pay a lot of attention to. What's happening?
Yeah, and we feel like with the app going out, they can see how many days in phase, they can see, how many sober days, they can see what goals they have done and not done. And hopefully communicating that and leaving it up to them will motivate them to say, man, I only have 2 things to do to phase up. Can I do it quicker? Because without it, they may not even know. You may not even know what they're doing. You have to go back and check your notes to see, where they are. If you give the responsibility to them, maybe they'll spark something and they'll come up to me like, hey, I just need to finish this one thing. Can we do it quicker than it's possible? We talk about education, age, employment, housing, and drug of choice as some of the key metrics to keep track on, and we've been harping on that for the last hour. I'll tell you a little quick thing that we discovered. There was a court, I won't say where, that had a lot of people absconding in phase 3. And we were like, why are people absconding in phase 3? So you start to dig around, you look at the age groups and all those things. It turns out that the population was, the majority of the folks in that court were around the 30 plus mark, which is a good thing if you look at the data point individually. But then what happened is if you correlated that population with the education, none of them actually even had a GED degree. Got it? So you have this this population which is supposed to do really well, but has a poor GED, and now in phase 3 you're handing out documents and reading materials and writing materials, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to read or write. So rather than admit that they don't know how to read and write, they just leave. Just really weird relationships between the data that we're talking about, right? So just keep an eye out for that. If you have somebody in the Goldilocks age group, right, 30 to 50, high graduation rates, but then the education, you can't just take one and say, well, the education is poor, but at least they have A, so they'll do well. No. Push towards the GED so they know how to read and write. So when you give them those materials, the judge says, you need to write an essay on quitting smoking. Well, they can't write. Now they won't write. Then you give them a sanction for not writing, and they will not admit to that. Now their days in phase keeps going because they're not doing what they're doing. And whatever good work has been done by you is now dissolving because of one essay that they had to write, which they don't know how to write.
Well,
So essentially, we're shaming them right out of the program.
And you don't even know that, right? Because you don't know that they don't know how to read or write, because you have to correlate and look at these factors of employment, education. They might be like, they might be doing really good work and they can't afford something for their family member because they may not be employed. That eats up everybody, you and I, and especially them.
I do a lot of training around clinical assessments. And the first thing I say to everybody is, for heaven's sakes, you're responsible to do a screen on people. You must screen them for the ability to read and the ability to write. I mean, you have to determine what their literacy level is and what their reading comprehension level is. Yes, that is part of doing a biopsychosocial. Everybody looks at you like, what do you mean? Well, don't put somebody in a treatment setting or a drug court that can't read or write. That's on you. And it really is. You know, so when you bring them into drug court, be sure that they've had a reading screen and a writing screen. I mean, don't let something like that happen. It should never get to that level. We need to know. It's as simple as giving them a piece of treatment literature and asking them to read it and tell you what it means. It's that simple. And if they can't, you know that's not a doable thing for them, and it's done one-on-one so they're not shamed, you know, that kind of thing. But we don't think about those things. It's really tragic, and we have a lot of those people, a lot more of them than you think we have.
Curious from an outsider's perspective, what happens to people who don't meet that literacy level? Like, would your program be able to provide them a bridge?
Well, yes. The answer to that is, then they need tutoring, help, and assistance, and we know that we're not going to make those kinds of assignments.
Yeah. You're not
My
going to give them
personal
assignments.
feeling is, we ought to do away with a lot of the writing assignments in a way. I don't think they're particularly useful or meaningful. I know what the average participant thinks of them. Yeah, you know, they don't get a lot out of that. We need to be more creative. We really do.
So
I have a related question to that, because we're starting to have more immigrants coming into the Missoula area.
Oh, boy.
So we've got people that have language barriers because
Yeah.
their native language is not English. And like I've got a DUI, somebody who's mandated by the court to do Crime for Life class, first offense DUI, but he speaks no English.
Sure.
And trying to find an interpreter is almost impossible. And
Is
then,
the college any resource for that?
well, we're working with the college right now to see. But then that raises some confidentiality questions.
Well, not if you,
Two.
whoever you get as an interpreter will have to sign a
Okay.
confidentiality.
Yeah.
And you know, the first step is actually knowing that that is the problem. A lot of times we're not able to reach that stage, and what we're debating here and talking about is, first, let's let the data speak to you so you know what is going on. What to do about it is a different matter. There could be a money-related issue, you know, resources-related issue. That's something to bring up with the state that this is a problem, but do you know? Right? And this is because someone told you up front that, you know, when you speak to them, they can't respond to you, so you know. But here, this is an even deeper problem, which is people who can speak but cannot read or write. There's more number of people who can speak English fluently, but will never be able to read or write that, right? So just to go back to, you know, we're talking about characteristics of successful, unsuccessful. The characteristics, and this won't take too long. The orange is the high school graduates, the GEDs. Success, neutral, and unsuccessful. Do you see the orange goes smaller as we move towards the right? 50% of the people who were successful had a high school, alternate school, or GED. Right here? None. Of the people who were unsuccessful, 40%, what is the education? Unknown. Do you think it's really unknown?
No.
They tell you they don't know.
Because
Part
they're
of this-
embarrassed.
Yes.
And so I'm just gonna tell you, if you have that immigration, and you're talking primarily Latinos, they're not gonna tell you their education because they honestly don't know.
Yeah, you
But
come and
because
say
they come from
GED.
Mexico, it's their
Yeah,
education.
these are more Asian.
They'll
And
have the
actually,
same problem.
the point, you know, from a fellow immigrant, right? If you brought me here today and told me, and I'm a college educated grad, you told me, oh, do you have a GED? I have no idea what a GED is. That's an American terminology of a certificate,
Yeah.
right? It has no meaning outside the contiguous states, right? And Hawaii, right? We don't know that. So that's one of the weird issues that are going to come up. So, but going back to that, hammering down the same issue here, they're not telling you. Now, if you don't know, a lot of folks may say, okay, well, we don't know what they have, so we're not going to push them towards something that they already have. How are you going to find out about that? Are you going to give them a GED equivalency assessment to figure that part out, whether they have a GED or not? It's very difficult, right? So, but these cause problems because they could have been helped out initially, and now you can't, and now you're done, right? They're graduated unsuccessfully. Same thing comes here, age. Look at that. 47% of the people who graduate successfully 24 years or older. That jumps to 51% between 25 and 34. That jumps to 58% between 35 and 49. Going back to the same example, those folks that were absconding because they did not know lied right here. 55% graduation rates if you look at education alone. Age alone, sorry. But no education, problem. So all of the data that I'm showing you, these are the snapshots from this, and you can put your own time frame to look at it. The next thing we're going to talk about is unsuccessful employment. Very easy. 20% of the folks that were fully employed did not graduate, but 65% did. Those colors in blue, same idea. You don't have to focus on the numbers, you can visually tell the direction that this is headed, right? Drugs of choice. Oops, sorry. This is the drug of choice that has been put into DIMS by all of you, of course, in the state of Montana. And as you can see, marijuana, meth, and alcohol. About the same. Heroin is even lower. But heroin is not one of the primary choices of drugs. But does not mean that you just focus on the three that we spoke about. Because as you can see from this, heroin is even worse. And this data is for the state of Montana. And this is the kind of data that we should be able to provide to you through Kevin. So, what should you focus on to improve your graduation rates? Now, you know all of the basic data points, and we share this presentation with you so you can track the individual ones and know the correlations, but stability in phase 1 is critical. Detox and show up. That's all they gotta do. Detox and show up. You don't talk to them about employment because, they may have 15, 20 jobs. They couldn't hold on to that. What makes you think they're gonna hold on to this one? Not happening. Housing, second one. Safe, affordable housing. Education. Get their GED as soon as possible. It should not be that 18 months from now they're getting the GED. If they made it to 18 months, you know they're going to graduate successfully. They made it to 18 months. That zone that we're talking about, the length of stay. The chances of them dropping out of the 12th month because they don't have a GED is more likely than they dropping out without a GED the 18th month. So I think look at it from a reverse angle. Get their GED so that they stay. So that they get a job, so that they are full-time employees, so that they don't do shenanigans during the daytime, right? They're now watching QVC, and they're fixing stuff, right? Improve incentive to sanction ratios. Look at why their sanction ratio is going down. Incentive sanction ratio is going down towards sanctions. Look at what the sanctions are. Why are they being sanctioned? Are they being sanctioned for something which is reading and writing? Are they being sanctioned for punctuality? Look at why they are being late. Ask. See what they say from there. And that's it.
So just a quick comment. What we're really saying, if we look at it the other way, is if you have a profile now of a young person, under 30, who is on meth, who is undereducated, and who is underemployed, should have the radar going and say, okay, heads up, we know we've got to get this person into an employment situation, a GED. We know there are things we've got to do with this person differently so as to avoid an early unplanned discharge. That's the other way to look at this. But that is the profile you're looking at right now that's going to be a problem.
So how can we get that information so we can share it?
Okay.
I'm gonna send this to Kevin,
Okay.
and he will have this presentation, there's a recording, and all of that will be shared with you.
No, what she means is,
Oh,
are you gonna sit down with us on DINs, where we're all like sitting there, and you go, you push this button, and then you enter it, and then you go
so,
to this side,
yeah,
and
so
you
I
can
just
see
had
it.
I just had a chat with Jeff before this conversation, and what we're going to do is that one of these Fridays, we're going to allot some time to two things. Number one is we're going to allot some time to how to best use DIMS on a best practices, and another hour is going to be allotted on click here to find this, click here to find this in the analytics, and how do you do that, right? It's a long time coming, and now we have all of the analytics in there, and the reason I haven't talked about everything is because one, let's get the basics right, and then we can jump into some of the more complicated ones to figure out what that means. Yep.
But for this information today, you can get it by asking Kevin for it.
Or you can just email it to me.
Yeah.
Email me that you need this presentation. I'll just, put it up and share it with you.
Well, my understanding is that all of the PowerPoints are gonna be available to us.
Yes.
I'm not sure how we're supposed to get them.
I think it's the same issue on how all your data is also supposed to be with you after that time. It's the same concept. So yeah, just reach out to us and we'll send it to you. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.